Hi, everyone. My name is Sandy Khalifa, and I teach in the Social and Cultural Department at Vanier College. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the 32nd Annual Symposium on the Holocaust and Genocide at Vanier College. Before we start the presentation, we'd like to thank an RA Chair, Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, as well as our partners, the Holocaust Education and Genocide Prevention Foundation, and the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. We also thank the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights and the Vanier College Teachers Association for their support. We give deep gratitude to the college for financial and logistical support, and especially the Office of the Faculty of Arts, Business, and Social Sciences, the Communications Department, and the Directors General's Office. Today's speaker is Louis Audet-Gosselin, giving a talk entitled Preventing Violent Extremism, a Need-Based Approach. Louis Audet-Gosselin is the Scientific and Strategic Director of the Center for Prevention of Radicalization Leading to Violence. He holds a Ph.D. in sociology and specializes in extremism. Louis is speaking live from Vanier College. Those participating through Zoom are automatically muted, but can ask questions during the Q&A function. We ask that attendees in the auditorium turn off ringers and keep noise to a minimum, so that all participants, including those on Zoom, can benefit from the talk. Thank you and welcome, Louis.
Thank you and good morning. This morning, I don't know how long I will go over this. I was hoping for that we have a few minutes at least for question or discussions. I'll start by presenting who we are a bit, the Center for the Prevention of Radicalization Leading to Violence, and then explain how we conceive extremism and how we try to prevent it at the way we can. And it's also a call for whole of society prevention. So we cannot do this alone. I think the whole society needs to work on prevention. So the center was created in 2015. Those of you who are old enough remember the sort of panic we had in Quebec and elsewhere across the world around youth, some of them from Quebec Cégeps, trying to reach Syria to fight for the Islamic State. This was not unprecedented, but the media coverage, the panic over some of the terrorist attacks that were carried on here. So there was one in Ottawa and one in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu in 2014, and other that were thwarted by security forces. And of course, there were very, very violent attacks across the world in the name of that group. So that prompted authorities to react and try to find ways to address that issue. So of course, there were a lot of money invested in security forces and prevention and specialized team, but there was also that general understanding that 16, 17-year-old people need more than a police response, and there's something wrong probably with the way we work as a society if some of our youth are considering going abroad and fight for an armed insurgency like that, especially one that was known for its gruesome videos of decapitation and so forth. So the Center for the Prevention of Radicalization Leading to Violence was one of the answers provided by first the City of Montreal with the backing of the Quebec government. So in 2015, that was set up. We're still funded mostly by those government, but we're a nonprofit independent organization trying to do prevention at every level. And as our name doesn't state, we also try to prevent hate-motivated behavior, so hate crimes, hate incidents. So that we have a more broader lens that than extremism per se. But today we'll mostly talk about extremism and how to prevent it, or some hints that we can use. First, by trying to define what is extremism. And this is there's a lot of spontaneous understanding about what is extremism. Everybody think they know what it is, or the extreme, but it's a bit more complicated than that. And we don't have a working definition that is consensual. Not everyone agrees with what is extremism. And we have that notion that there's a sort of a normal distribution of ideas, and the extremists would be at the edges. So people who are very engaged in some form of activism, people who want to abolish the state, or to abolish food, animal consumption, and so forth. So there's this understanding that there's the middle ground that is okay, and then the extremes that are less okay. This is not how we understand extremism. And for us, being at the fringe, being at the margin, having radical ideas is necessary for a society to go forward. It questions our what we take for granted. It moves people and governments and authorities to address pressing issues. And so one example was the whole communist and socialist movements that wanted to abolish private property and collectivize means of production and wealth. They didn't really succeed in doing that, but they forced democratic societies to adapt and to take care of the needs of those more in needs. And they because they had extremists often have a point. They ask significant questions about what's going wrong in our society, and how we must address. So radicalism as such is not what we try to prevent in terms of extremism. We can define extremism, the form of extremism that we try to prevent it's more a mindset, or a way to look at others, the way to look at politics, a way to look at social activism that we believe is detrimental for the whole of society. And based on research, we can identify 5 broad categories, and there are many ways to define that, but this is the working definition, or working ideas that we use. So, and we'll go through each of them with some examples so that it's clear, and it's not a list to check. Not every movement or radicalized person need to check all these attitudes to be deemed an extremist, and having one of them is not also sufficient enough in most cases to be deemed extremist. So these are broad categories where extremism can be recognized. So first of all, the understanding of politics as a struggle for supremacy. So it's sort of zero-sum game approach to politics, thinking that when others win, we lose, that we need to win power to impose our views on others. So that's one of the mindset of extremism. Another one is very important, is the designation of an enemy outgroup that benefits from a real or perceived injustice. And that framing of the outgroup leads to often to dehumanization of that group. So there are many cases, and this is very important and very common to extremist groups. So and we see that a lot. We talk about anti-Semitism, a lot of extremist movements perceive Jews as an evil force that will work against them and works at promoting injustice and maintaining an unfair world. But there are many other examples where you see the other as the enemy, you dehumanize the enemy, and then that justifies a hostile action against that specific group and the whole framing of politics and of social activism against a group, which, of course, leads in the extreme cases to genocide, but in other cases will lead to very violent and antisocial political action. The opposition to pluralism, deliberation, and the rule of law. So a form of anti-democratic mindset that is not always explicit. So you very often you see extremist movements. They claim to be democratic. They claim to speak for the people or for the general will, but in a way that does not include counterpowers. That does not include rule of law. That does not include what the elements of what we call liberal democracy, so the right of minorities. These elements of a more populist view on democracy, but of course, in many cases, like the fascist movements, jihadi organization, they will reject democracy outright and call for other forms of government, of authoritarian governments, without hearing from minorities or from dissidents or from people who think otherwise. Another element is intolerance and aims at homogenization of society. So that will to take power and to impose the views on everybody without consideration for other forms of action, for other expressions, dissident expressions, and then an implicit or explicit legitimization of violence. This is not always obvious. This is not always clear in the extremist discourse, but it's often latent. And when we talk about hate speech, which is not physically violent, it's not like throwing a bomb, it is still a form of violence, and expressing that ideas where that specific groups should not live here, should be deported, or should have their rights restrained. It is a violence in itself. And so there's this implicit acceptance of violence in that hate group, and also what we see, which is very difficult because it is not enforceable by law, but you see public figures voicing disgust or hatred about a specific category, a minority group, or anything, but they're not asking for violence explicitly against that group. But if they have a significant audience, then we're pretty sure that individuals or followers will carry out violence against that group. We see it a lot. So in a nutshell, that's how we understand extremism. So it's not having ideas that are outside of the box, beliefs that are that doesn't fit with the general mindset of a specific society. It is more about the attitude against other forms of expression, other ideas, other groups, and the designation of an enemy or a scapegoat or an outgroup that is at the center of words evil, and that there's action that needs to be taken against that group. So that's where we can recognize extremism. So, of course, there are all sorts of examples that we come to mind that maybe at the margin, and the violence one is we're talking about democratic societies here, right? So armed action against colonialism, it's hard to stand for me to stand here and say this is not legitimate. In cases of uprising against authoritarian regimes, you see all sort of political groups, liberals, conservatives, socialists, and so forth, take up arms against an authoritarian regime. It's not our mandate to say this is right or wrong. We're standing in Quebec here. The CPRLV is a Quebec organization, and we're building our framework of understanding to the Quebec society, where we believe that there are ways to express ourselves in a democratic, pro-social way, to express maybe radical ideas or new ideas or ideas that will challenge the status quo or the powers that be. It is very, very, very good, as long as we respect the frameworks of democracy and of democratic expression. So that's the framework that we use and that we try to promote. Now, once we sort of define extremism, we want to understand what leads someone to adopt that framework, that mindset. And the conference is named Needs-Based Approach. It's called that way. That's in opposition to a risk-based approach that was and that is still dominant in criminology and in most of the state responses to extremism or to all sorts of social violence or political issues. We're not talking about risk factors. We're more talking about vulnerability factors, and on the other side of the coin, protective factors. We notice that, and we use a help. I don't know how to call it in English. Relation d'aide approach, where our work is akin to social workers and psychologists and psychoeducators, but in a non-clinical way. So we're not ingrained in the health and social service network. We're a community organization that works in the community, but we're taking that approach to try to address the needs of people who embark in the radicalization process, because we know from research that there's not a specific profile of radicalized individuals, but their pathway to extremism is almost always a response to needs that are not addressed by the whole of society. And that's why I talked about whole of society approach to prevention. So if schools, healthcare sector, families, the work environment, private government don't do their job to to integrate everybody into a form of a social contract, then we will lose people, and people will be listening to other forms of expression and to other means to answer their needs. So we have thrown a lot of potential vulnerability factors here. There are others, and there are other ways to understand that. And you don't need to have all that to become an extremist. And one person, two people in these situations will react very differently. So comes from the individual to the macro social. At every level, there are factors that can that can trigger radicalization process. So based on research, relational and emotional connection is a very strong factor to radicalization. So radicalization is not it's not a purely cognitive and rational process. Quite the opposite. Often people embark in a radicalization process because they know significant people for them that are that profess these ideas, and they connect, they relate to these groups, often because they don't have these meaningful social relations in their life. So people with heavy family problems are more vulnerable. People who socialize in networks of contact that are radicalized are also more vulnerable. And life events that also estrange you from a group of friends, from family, can also lead you to find other social circles, find another circle of belonging, friends, families, and some radicalized, a lot of radicalized individuals, they say that they found a new family in these radicalized organization. So this is clearly something that is sought after. Life events, difficult life events. So we see it in a lot of life stories of radicalized individuals. So, breakups, job loss of perspective in life that makes people more vulnerable. In case of or religiously oriented radicalization, spiritual crisis, and coming to terms with spiritual and religious traditions that are not fulfilling can also lead to sort of religious magasinage, sort of where looking for new ways to express spirituality. There's a lot of work done on cults and on how people try to find new meaning to life. We're in a very secularized society, which doesn't mean we don't need life goals. We don't need rules. Of course we do. And a lot of people are seeking for a very clear path towards how to live your life. And some form of radical religious movements can offer that, but also political and ethical movement can also provide that kind of frame of a guide for living a good life. And so some of these frame are extremists. So that kind of spiritual crisis can be a vulnerability factor. Identity is also a big issue. So whether it is isolation and not feeling of not belonging in a society, it's a common trope and a common trend in many radicalization processes. if we go back to 2014-15 and the Islamic State, at this height of the Islamic State and their recruitment in Western society, so in Middle Eastern society is very different. But in Western society, a lot of the recruits to the Islamic State were second generation immigrants in the Western society who, coming at the age of adulthood, realized that they were not equal. They were not accepted as Muslims for instance, in Quebec. And the debates that we had in Quebec about the religious symbols, the place of Islam in society and religion in society in general, played a big role in the path of radicalization of several youth at that time. So identity crisis is a big driver. On the reverse, like feeling stigmatized or feeling the feeling doesn't have to be real. So if we think about far-right movements and xenophobic movements in Canada or elsewhere in the Western societies, there's this feeling of losing something or being on the verge of losing a way of life, losing cultural elements that people think that are important, and that immigration and more diverse society will lead to decadence or to that losing thing. Studies don't show that. I mean, there's no objective demonstration that immigration brings a loss of wealth or a loss of status, life status for native Western groups, but the feeling is real. So we need to address that feeling and to open that discussion about what is important in your culture, what do you fear to lose, and why can we go further than that. There are individual psychological elements that can be vulnerability factors, and I'm very careful here because extremism is not an illness, it's not a disease that can be cured. This doesn't work that way. It's always existed, and it's a social issue mostly. But we do see in some cases psychological mental health conditions that pose further vulnerability factors, mostly in individual violent lone actor paths to to radicalization. Less so in organized group like Al-Qaeda or Islamic State or the Red Brigades at the time. They didn't recruit a lot of the psychological profile of the members is quite similar to that of the broader society. But in some cases, you see that distress, anxiety, depression are correlated to a higher support to violent extremism. And I'm very try to be very careful here, because most people who are anxious or who's not anxious, I mean, they don't become extremist. So this is not a risk factor that lead to individual surveillance of people who have a mental health condition. Not at all. It's more a call to broaden and strengthen our social intervention on these issues for themselves, because it is suffering, but also for their social impact, potential social impact. And of course, the broader context, political debates, the way real injustice. I mean, there are things that are going wrong, and extremist groups are sometimes asking the right question about how unequal things are, about how specific groups are being excluded from political power, or from economical development, or for cultural hegemony, so forth. And so we hear a lot about polarization in our societies. This is something that needs to be stressed, and we have important elections coming in the United States, here in Canada. These are always tense moments that lead to more political anxiety, and that leads to more radicalization, unfortunately. Also, mentioned that we try to prevent hate crimes and hate incidents. We see that whenever there's a public discussion being held about one specific group, it leads to more hate crimes against that group. The war in Gaza is a good example where anti-Semitic and Islamophobic hate has skyrocketed since the start of the conflict. But in past context, we see all these movements against trans and drag people. They are also heavily correlated with public debates on these groups, on these identities. So this is a call to be more to tone down maybe some of our political discourse, or to remember to make political discourse about the general good, instead of exploiting wedge issues and polarization against people. So on the reverse of the coin of vulnerability factors, and that's where our work comes in, but also work of the schools, social services, and families, friends. Everybody can do something against these factors. So there are issues where we don't have any power. So if someone has a mental health condition, we cannot erase it. If someone has had adverse life events, we cannot go back in time and make that event not happen. But we can work on strengthening protective factors around individuals. And this is also a call to rehumanize individuals that are engaged in the radicalization process, because they were probably led there through a feeling of marginalization, of not being heard, not having their place. And we need to ask questions about how do we make place for everybody? How do we create belonging and path forward? So it's really the reverse of the coin of the vulnerability factor, trying to strengthen non-extremist social circles. So if we see that someone still has significant and meaningful connection with their families or with friends that are outside their radicalization process, that's a good sign. That's something that can be worked on, that can be strengthened, because you're less likely to dehumanize others if you have a significant relationship with members of that outgroup. So this is very important. And in general, emotional factors are more important than cognitive or ideological ones. People don't engage in extremism because they read all the literature about that movement and that ideology, and then decide, yes, this is what I believe in. They are mostly led there because they're are going away from things that don't work, and they're looking for answers. So the general idea is to help these individuals or these groups to find these answers in a non-extremist environment, in a pro-social form of social activism. So protecting democracy, our democratic institutions, the plurality of expressions is key, is really something that needs to be strengthened, that needs to be encouraged, ways of nonviolent social action, expression. So for this is really important. Talking about like critical thinking, there are ways to strengthen attitudes that go further than the us versus them dichotomy of extremism, and to promote a more nuanced approach and more nuanced reflexivity on social and political issues, and resolving that. All this is easier said than done, right? But resolving identity crisis or trying to find ways for different identities to feel a sense of belonging together. These are fundamental factors that need to be promoted, and I reiterate the idea that also the negative impact of polarized discourse and of hate speech is very significant. And recent studies have shown that when you are exposed to hateful content, it has an effect on everybody. Everybody loses empathy, even if you don't agree with the speech that you're hearing or reading. You feel more depressed. You feel less empathy for the groups that are targeted in the discourses. So when whoever has a public voice in our society needs to be mindful of that. Journalists, politicians, activists, any kind of teachers need to be mindful that whenever they are singling out a group, they might be causing harm. So finding ways to express ourselves, to address real issues, like issues of the place of religion in society, or conflicts, or identity are real and needs to be debated. We need to try to find a ways to make that debate more constructive and more pro-social for the common good. So a last slide, and another way to show the work that we try to do on the radicalization process. So I've switched from extremism to radicalization process. So the radicalization process is more the pathway for an individual to get involved in extremism. So there's always something to be done. Like when someone is being radicalized or getting radicalized, we can do something at every step, and there's no line that beyond that you're not you're lost. So there's always ways to come back to a more pro-social form of social engagement. We don't like the word de-radicalization. That's been used a lot in the media and in political discourse a few years ago. Because we don't talk someone out of extremism, we don't convince them that they are wrong. This simply doesn't work. We try to promote disengagement from violence and social reintegration by working on protective factors at every step of the radicalization process, which start by like wider primary prevention in the public sphere, awareness campaigns that include everybody, education, and so forth, towards more individual forms of action that can lead to stepping out of extremism, or to getting at least disengaged from violence, and then work with the persons towards social reintegration in a more pro-social way. So this is not something that is easy. This is not something that can be done quickly, and it doesn't always work. I mean, because we don't change the mindset of someone who doesn't want to change. But it's always worth trying, because we do have successes, and we do see people getting away from extremism and finding other ways to contribute to social debates and social activism. I think I'll leave you there, and if we can maybe have questions or discussions.
Hi, so thank you very much for that. I'll open it to questions from the students first, and then I have a few questions for you online.
Alors, bonjour, Dr. Gosselin. Alors, j'aurais deux questions pour vous. D'abord, vous parlez de l'extrémisme et vous parlez d'abord et comment ça peut amener à la violence et ceci, cela. On le sait bien sûr qu'au Canada, nous n'avons pas le premier amendement comme aux États-Unis pour protéger les droits de parole. Et donc, ma question, c'est que comment est-ce qu'on balance le droit de parole qui est nécessaire dans une démocratie avec la possibilité de violence? Alors, parce que qu'est-ce qui arrive, c'est qu'on voit dans les deux pays une culture de cancel culture, ou même l'idée que quelque chose qui peuvent être, bien sûr, hors normes, peuvent enlever, bien sûr, les droits démocratiques.
Oui. C'est une question assez difficile. Il n'y a pas une réponse là, très, très claire. Donc, on voit, vous mentionnez l'exemple américain où il y a très peu de limites à ce qu'on peut dire, en fait, si on n'incite pas vraiment à une violence là, très, très, très spécifique. On sait que ces formes d'expression-là ont des conséquences. On sait qu'il y a des conséquences graves, que ça va inciter d'autres personnes à passer à l'acte, que ça va... Donc, je ne suis pas juriste, donc je ne vais pas faire de recommandations, vraiment. C'est que vous mettez le doigt sur quelque chose d'assez important, de fondamental, et qui fait que depuis des années, le gouvernement fédéral essaie de passer une loi pour le contrôle du discours haineux en ligne, et n'y arrive pas. Parce que justement, à chaque proposition, on se retrouve à brimer des droits d'expression qui peuvent être légitimes, ou brimer des détournements de discours haineux qui peuvent être constructifs, et créer aussi énormément de frustration si on ne peut pas exprimer certains discours, parce que beaucoup de discours qui sont haineux, les discours haineux et les actes haineux, c'est assez délicat, parce qu'il y a ce que la loi va reconnaître comme haineux objectivement, ou essaie de reconnaître une objectivité à la haine, mais c'est aussi ce que les personnes ressentent. Et donc, certains termes qui ne sont pas exprimés de façon haineuse, ou la personne qui l'exprime n'est pas nécessairement consciente de, de la portée haineuse de ces discours-là, mais ça va être reçu comme haineux. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'on fait avec ça? Et ça va être tout à fait contre-productif de brimer cette expression-là, parce que la personne n'a pas compris. Donc, il y a vraiment un équilibre à maintenir ici, mais les réseaux sociaux et la circulation des discours en ligne viennent débalancer un peu cet équilibre-là qu'on pouvait avoir au Canada, parce que la haine circule de façon vraiment très rapide et même on n'arrive pas à légiférer. Donc,
Je suis content que vous avez parlé une seconde de la moralité objective parce que, bien sûr, vous avez parlé d'une dichotomie entre l'extrémisme et la radicalisation. Vous avez dit que l'extrémisme, ça amène à la violence et on essaye de blâmer des cultures et ceci, cela, tandis que la radicalisation, c'est des idées hors normes. Alors, ma question d'ailleurs, c'est que quand on parle de la moralité objective, par exemple, je vous donne un exemple concret, dans les années 60, Trudeau père avait légiférer en disant que ce n'est pas la place du gouvernement de rentrer dans la chambre à coucher des gens. Et donc, à ce point-là, c'était quelque chose de, quand même, on peut dire extrême, mais aujourd'hui, on dirait que c'est normal.
oui.
Alors, ma question, alors, c'est que quand on parle de la radicalisation aujourd'hui, comment est-ce qu'on fait ça vous comprenez ma question d'ailleurs avec la radicalisation qui est hors norme et pas normale, et la radicalisation qui serait plutôt des pensées vieilles ou même des pensées qui sont acceptées par le public général, mais qui peuvent être un peu radicales.
Oui, ben, c'est pour ça que le centre a le nom radicalisation menant à la violence, dans la mesure où on ne peut pas venir dire telle idée radicale est bonne ou mauvaise. Donc, effectivement, et on ne sait pas les idées qui paraissent comme hors normes aujourd'hui, dans 40 ans, elles vont peut-être avoir fait progresser l'humanité beaucoup, et des idées comme le suffrage des femmes ou même l'abolition de l'esclavage étaient portées par des minorités qui étaient considérées comme radicales par le passé. Donc, ça, c'est des formes d'expression qu'on doit conserver, même si ça dérange, même si ça vient heurter des sensibilités. Il y a certainement des façons de conserver aussi des formes d'expression qui sont plus nostalgiques du passé ou plus conservatrices. On, donc, on ne va pas être nécessairement dans le jugement de ces formes d'expression-là. Donc, c'est pour ça que j'ai mis l'image de la courbe normale. On ne va pas dire ça, c'est trop hors norme ou quoi. C'est vraiment le processus d'entrer dans l'extrémisme qui va être notre focus.
Questions from other students? I see some of you are here. You maybe have an assignment to do about this. You might want to ask questions for your assignment. No? So before I go to the online questions, did you have something else you wanted to ask? Sure.
J'allais juste finir avec l'idée que, bien sûr, quand c'est accepté par le peuple, ça peut être des fois une idée radicale, mais on voit aussi, bien sûr, spécialement au Québec, on parle de l'idée du vœu majoritaire, qui peut être des fois une pensée radicale qui obscure les droits des minorités. Alors, ma question, c'est d'ailleurs, si quelque chose est accepté par la majorité et c'est considéré quand même une pensée radicale, comment est-ce qu'on...
Oui, donc c'est ça, c'est l'idée de l'opposition pluraliste, la délibération. Donc, c'est ce que j'ai essayé de mentionner avec des formes d'extrémisme qui se réclament de la démocratie, mais d'une démocratie où si on a la majorité, ben, on a raison, donc qui va brimer les droits des minorités. Donc, c'est d'amener la démocratie au-delà de ça et de considérer aussi que la majorité peut avoir des idées haineuses et qu'on doit quand même faire quelque chose, là. Donc, si des nazis gentils et démocratiques qui prendraient le pouvoir et qui appliqueraient leur programme, ce n'est pas nécessairement vraiment quelque chose qu'on encourage.
So there's a few questions online and there seems to be a lot of overlap between them. So I think I'm going to try to consolidate them. So the question seems to be how the Center for the Prevention of Radicalization Leading to Violence is assisting or is working with the SPVM and trying to combat anti-Semitism specifically in the city, but some of the other questions seem to be talking about current hate movements more generally, and whether the center has leveraged its knowledge and resources to offer assistance to the SPVM, whether you're asked for your assistance And there seems to be a lot of talk about needing education more than ever, which we could probably all agree with. So wanting to know if you've been playing any role in advising the city on that, and also how to go about improving relations with cultural communities, as they're often referred to in this province.
Okay, so first with the SPVM and the police in general, our mandate is for the whole of Quebec. So we work with all local police and the provincial police and the RCMP too. We work not that closely because, of course, we have a helpline where people, individuals or families or institutions can call for assistance with cases of presumed radicalization. We don't share any information with the police unless there's an imminent threat of violence, which is the same guideline as any professional action. Psychologists, social workers all have that code, because otherwise people would stop calling us if they know that we're sharing information. So we're collaborating in some very acute cases where there's violence involved or imminent violence involved, which is very rare, because overall people know that if there's an emergency, they call the police. They don't call an organization like us. Would come more on the second line sort of action. But we do talk informally on a more general level with police forces to understand that whether we're seeing the same thing, and whether trying to advise the police as much as we can on ways to interact with perpetrators of hate incidents, for instance, or anti-Semitic incidents in that more specific case. But we work with any kind of hate pretty much the same ways. With the cultural communities and the outreach that we do with community organizations, we of course try to maintain as wide a network possible with every community organization that is involved in combating or in preventing hate, or have any sort of legitimacy towards specific communities. We understand that we are seen as part of the institutional network, and so we try to come to the help of organizations that are already involved in preventing hate across Quebec.
I actually have a question from myself. I noticed you said towards the end that singling out a group can be causing more harm, and you mentioned that in classroom settings and other settings like that, we should be careful. So there's a trend now of sort of identifying ourselves or centering kind of who we are vis-a-vis where we are. And I'm wondering your thoughts from the perspective of this model as to whether it's a good idea for us to be doing that and asking that of our students, like starting a class with, I'm a settler and I'm from this place, and where are you from? And are you from, if that might be causing harm, especially when it's done very early in the relationship with students.
I haven't thought about that specifically, and it's been a long time since I haven't been in front of a classroom that position, so we didn't have that back. It was not that. It's not 1950, but so this comes from demands from historically marginalized groups for recognition, right? That are in the last years finally met by institutions, and some of it is performative, right? You have institutions, banks waving the pride flag, so people understand that it's a lot of it is performative from an institution, but some of it is not. And it's really appreciated by members of historically marginalized groups. So I wouldn't advise to drop all this altogether, but to understand there's probably ways to do it in a more organic way or in more subtle way that we've seen it in many places where it sort of created pressure. And also I have an anecdote from one of my colleagues' thesis, Frédéric Nadeau, who worked in the Quebec far-right movement. He did an anthropology thesis on that, so he spent a lot of time with members of neo-fascist far-right groups here in Quebec. And one of the guys, he was born and raised in Australia, and he at high school he was this was young white guy, and he resented the way that everybody seemed to have a cool identity that they showed. So they were Aboriginal people, immigrants from several countries, Muslims, students, women, LGBTQ people who were expressing themselves, and it was they had their history, they had an identity, and he felt like he was just a white guy, and that was not cool unless he found his French Canadian roots. And he ended up immigrating here and getting involved with a far-right group. So there's probably a way that where we could have given him a something to be proud of before he found it in the far-right groups. So the way that we're seeing a bit of a backlash against that EDI culture, and I'm saying it, and I'm not really, it's not pejorative, and it's fundamentally a good thing, and we're progressing towards something in our society, and they're meeting historical demands of historically marginalized groups. But there might be a bit of wiggling here, and we're be careful not losing people along the way.
And sorry to put you back in the teacher space. So we have another question from one of our participants online. Liz is asking, can you walk us through the general process of supporting extremists to disengage and reintegrate with society? What are some of the common success points and stumbling blocks?
It's a very it's a one-on-one work, right? The key is really to adapt to the situation and to work with the individual. We try not to be prescriptive. We try to make small steps, right? So if the person is completely cut off with his family, is in prison, and has maybe a window to go out in 3 years, what can we do so when he comes out, he can have another way forward? So it can be work training, it can be anger management, it can be really help with relationships, trying to make a girlfriend if he had all sorts of problems with that in the past. Belonging, sense of belonging. So it's really hard to draw we don't have a specific path, and this research hasn't shown that there's a magical recipe. We know that what doesn't work. We know that trying to bring an imam that try to teach the correct way to understand the Quran will not work with someone who's engaged in jihadism. That trying to be too prescriptive doesn't work. What seems to be working is to try to work on emotional connections and on alleviating some of the burdens that led to extremism in the first place. So And also evaluation is very hard. So I like to try to think that all the people who went through our programs and disengaged from violence and from extremism did it because of our work, but we cannot isolate all the variables. There are a lot of other factors, and the individuals do most of the work, right? You cannot help someone who doesn't want to be helped. So it's almost impossible to pinpoint really the effectiveness of our work.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions online. Are there any other questions in the audience here? Oh, okay. Hang on.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
J'aimerais savoir, dans le cas des actualités d'aujourd'hui, comme la guerre en Ukraine et le génocide en Palestine, est-ce que le pays, j'aimerais savoir le pays ou le groupe qui attaquerait en premier ou en plus grande quantité serait considéré comme extrémiste, puisque le but de ces pays-là est d'éradiquer la population et d'homogénéiser le peuple, de caractéristiques que vous avez mentionnées propres aux extrémistes.
Comme je l'ai dit, notre action se concerne l'extrémisme et les actes haineux au Québec. C'est très difficile de porter un jugement sur de la part de notre organisation, hein, sur des actions militaires là, qui se produisent à l'étranger. Quand on est avec des États aussi qui sont organisés, on rentre dans d'autres dynamiques que simplement le parcours d'extrémisme. Donc, ce sont des enjeux qui, au centre, nous dépassent. Dans ces cas-là, on essaie de faire de la prévention des conséquences ici, des actes haineux et une potentielle radicalisation autour de ces enjeux-là. C'est certain que dans les sociétés, les pays dont vous parlez, il y a des mouvements qu'on peut certainement considérer comme extrémistes là, qui influencent les prises de décision des États. Mais je vous renverrai vers des spécialistes vraiment de ces régions-là pour un jugement plus éclairé, en fait.
J'aurais une autre question, et cela, c'est plus par rapport aussi aux médias. J'ai appris récemment que les médias peuvent légalement nous mentir, c'est-à-dire ne pas dire la vérité ou pas explicitement dire la vérité. Quoi faire pour ne pas développer des pensées haineuses sur le bon côté? On va dire sur le bon côté, je ne sais pas comment le word, it's like the good side, or like yeah, but how to like not develop because like the titles of media and the way they word sometimes can influence our decision, how to not fall in this trap.
Yeah. Well, the media literacy is a big thing, and that need to be really strengthened in our society. So we try to work with media organization to also so that they're aware of the potential impact of the news that they broadcast, the way that they broadcast news. Most journalists are really aware of the potential of polarization from their act. Some are not. So that's where we can have action. So journalism is far from perfect, and there's really a media crisis in Canada as well as elsewhere in the world, and there's really a need to do something about that. I'm not a media expert, so there's something that needs to be asked to a specific expert. But when we compare with others, there are still recourse, there are still ways to address inadequacies in media coverage. We need to maybe go beyond the journalism pretense to show an objective, to be purely objective. They're of course they're not. They try to be as neutral as they can, or to be. There's an ethic that they try to follow, but challenge that ethic. Challenge when it's not being held fully. Notre pari, c'est que le Québec a les outils, on a les espaces démocratiques pour ne serait-ce qu'améliorer les façons dont les contre-pouvoirs, la démocratie fonctionnent. C'est des espaces où on encourage tout le monde à s'engager.
Merci beaucoup.
We have a follow-up online about how people might end up getting back into extremism after, let's say, the work has been done and the person seems to have disengaged, and then that they might fall back into it. And what are the factors that might be considered for that?
That's a very good question. It's a long process, right? So once someone disengaged from its former group, the work is not done, right? That person will probably have trauma for her whole life. There's all the conditions that led that person there, if there are not counterbalance at the minimum, that will lead to either coming back into extremism or another form of extremism. We've seen people deconvert and reconvert into other form of extremism, or become so anti their former movement that it is still a form of extremism. Usually it takes years to really be ready to address this issue. There's a lot of work on former extremists, and because a lot of former extremists want to engage against extremism very quick after they've exited extremism, which is not always a good idea, and we try to strengthen their belonging to society and their solidity and their life before they can engage in that form. So all form of new negative life event can also bring a return into extremism, polarize debates also. So we've seen that with the war in Gaza, where people are so angry with that they reconsider their way outside of extremism and say, well, so it re-traumatizes and engages, and so we have the same radicalization actors, agents, bringing the same simplistic extremist answers, and that might lead people to go back into extremism.
Thank you. So I think we'll close the webinar for now. And if anybody wants to ask any questions of Louis privately up at the front, we have a few minutes for that. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, Louis, for your talk.
Thank you.